So were you all good? Matthew and everybody tells me you were very good. I'm pleased. I'm good too, tired but good. But boy, hasn't the world been busy while we've been out of touch. Japan has been rocking, Libya has been rolling, politicians from Lansing and Madison and Washington roil and spoil and otherwise stir the pot and raise the blood pressure. Never a dull moment. And you know something, a dull moment would be welcome now and then. I'd sort of appreciate that, but I'm a little dazed and confused with all that's going on. I have a lot I want to say today, but I can't say it all, so you're going to have to help me out here by paying attention to the important stuff and forgetting the dull and unimportant stuff. I'm going to leave you to figure that out. So I always need your help because, as I remind everyone, a sermon is not what I say or even what you hear. It's what we make together here as we try to grasp some hunk of the truth that we can hold on to for a few days. Something that will grab our attention and hold our hearts and propel us through the week. And so as I ask every week, may these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be true in thy sight, O thou who art my rock and my redeemer. There's a lot of stuff I could be talking about that was in the news since last I was in this pulpit, but the one I'm going to start with is local. So I'm out of town, somewhere on the West Coast, and they're on the news. Actually, not on the news, on the internet is Rob Bell and his new book, Putting Hell on Trial. And all of his evangelical brothers and sisters giving him hell for challenging this standard doctrine of standard Christianity. And I know, then it got on the news, I saw it on one of the morning shows, and there he was being daring and difficult and dramatic, and suddenly I remembered I was angry. I'm angry because this is not news. The idea that there's no hell has been around for a long time. Just 5 years ago, Carlton Pearson, a Pentecostal minister in Tulsa, Oklahoma, said there was no hell, and all of his church of 5,000 left him. He went from 5,000 to 500 in 2 years. But he was not the person to come up with it. That fellow Hosea Ballou I talked about earlier with that parable of the dirty child, that was his notion too, that there was no hell. That God was so good that no sin that any of us could commit could alienate us completely from God. And of course, this was a Baptist church once, and I lived down in Texas for a while, where I was told that it is standard understanding in Baptist theology that, quote, once saved, always saved. That is, once you've made your commitment to Jesus Christ, you can't unmake it, no matter how far you might try to fall from grace. And you never know who really has done it. So there is a universalist strain in the Baptist tradition. It made itself evident here in interesting ways. And I would say that it goes all the way back to Paul and to Jesus in those words that we heard, not just those words. I know we don't like those ideas that just as one man's trespass led to condemnation for all, we don't like that part, but the other part is really important. So one man's act of righteousness leads to justification for all. In other words, even Paul thought that Jesus redeemed everyone, not just a few who happened to be in the neighborhood when he was there. Now, why does this matter to us except that we're intellectuals and we love debating these things and it gives us pleasure? It's not because Rob Bell is important either, but because we have been saying this thing that Rob's been saying for at least a century, and we're not on the Today Show. That's why I'm a little ticked off. I could be jealous and resentful that he's getting all the attention for something we've known for a really long time. But then again, I don't have the head or the glasses, and I'm not young and hip, and it's not news. It's just not news. And that's when I remembered the story of the prodigal son. Because my version of that story, it's Rob who's the prodigal. He's gone off and spent cheap evangelical money on building up a great and beautiful church, and I celebrate him because he's very good at what he does. But then something came and struck him that perhaps all was not right in the world in which he lived, and so to my mind he's asking forgiveness for having put everyone in hell. He's the one who has come to himself and realized that there is a place at the table for everyone. And so I'm feeling like the elder son. Well, everybody's paying attention to him. And I should remember that I should be like the parent or the father and say, who cares how they all come, as long as they all come. And that's where I want to focus on today, is that we need to take a different perspective sometimes. I think that some of our anxiety about Christianity is based on our sense of its unfairness, that only those who are in the club get to play, and those who are outside are left out. But of course, the whole message of no hell or universalism or everyone gets into heaven is that there is no club to join. There is no ticket you have to buy. It's already there for you. And that's a tough message to sell, because after all, you're not selling anything because you already have it. And that's part of the challenge I'm going to get to today. Because you see, the point of view that Rob is discovering and that Carlton Pearson discovered and that Hosea Ballou preached and that we have lived, and perhaps even Paul struggled to understand, is that when we look at salvation or heaven or hell or immortality or even justice, we tend to see it from the point of view of competing siblings. When the younger one gets more than we got. Anyone ever remember sitting at a table with a sibling and they had to cut the cake? You know, he got more. And we look for the rough justice of equality, when as a parent, and some of you are parents of more than one child, and as you know, you love them both or three or all four of them equally, but you don't treat them equally because they are not interchangeable human beings. And what's not enough for one is just right for another and too much for a third. We tend to see ourselves as children and not as parents, when the proper perspective religiously is to imagine ourselves being the parent, to see it from, shall we say, God's perspective, or in Ballou's parable, to ask, did we love the child because we washed it, or did we wash the child because we loved it? I'm telling you that Jesus is telling this message over and over again in the Christian scriptures. This is the message that gets lost in all that I get to be part of your club attitude. In parables like the prodigal son or the lost sheep or the lost coin, in the ways he treated people, he radically challenged the customary ideas of equity and justice. He challenged all the ideas in force at the time, which is one of the reasons why after 3 years he was condemned as a criminal and executed. So believe me, if you're going to preach universalism, your life will not get easier. But we're going to spend Lent, in my opinion, trying to reclaim Jesus as the original, prototypical religious liberal, the one who put us on this path that we are on now as a liberal church. And you say, well, wait a minute, I don't believe in Jesus or in Christ or in God. So I think that that's not the point. The message is that everyone belongs. Everyone, no exceptions. And that's what he taught, that's what he lived. And I contend that starting with John Herman Randall over a century ago, that's what was preached here at Fountain Street Church. Because they looked at the man Jesus and saw that this was a man who didn't spend his time amongst the privileged, which are people like us, but amongst the riffraff, like the folks on Division Street, who made friends with the rabble and preached the parables and lived those ways that we now think are so admirable, but if we saw them live today, would find scurrilous. We need to remember and reclaim that Jesus, whose actual name is Yehoshua, by the way, Jesus is just the Greek way of saying that. Jesus is the source of our faith, to embrace it and celebrate it rather than to cede it to the Orthodox. My attitude is, it's not we that are different, it's them. So I see Rob Bell as the prodigal son who is finding his way slowly back home to the church that he really wants to belong to, and getting out of the club mentality. Now, I know we all want to feel special and feel privileged. We can even feel that way about Fountain Street Church. Hey, I belong to Fountain Street Church. I'm a pretty smart person. We all like to feel important. And what could be more privileged ultimately than to be among the few that get to live forever? Now there's a good club. A God of damnation and hell, of course, makes that all work. You get to be with me, you don't. But the irony is that that God that we see as choosing right and wrong heaven and hell, sinner and saved, is more like the older son in the prodigal story than the father, isn't it? Someone making judgments about another person because it just doesn't feel fair. And of course, that's the whole hell and heaven thing. It isn't fair that bad people get into heaven. Well, who died and made you God? Who are we to judge fairness from a merely human perspective? A God of damnation and hell behaves more like an outraged child than an enlightened parent. And that's what I'm asking us to do, is to get into the spiritual perspective of taking, shall we say, God's point of view, which is always larger than our own. In our final hymn, which is not a cue, by the way, we're going to wait a few more minutes before we get there. In our final hymn, it says, "There's a wideness in your mercy like the wideness of the sea. There's a kindness in your justice that is more than you." It's a plea to see things from a larger perspective. Now, I want to tell you that I'm therefore going to take the Father's perspective and say, put rings on his finger and sandals on his feet, and let's kill the fatted calf and say, "Rob, it's good to have you back. Love having you in the glimmer of a universal light. I hope that you stick with it. It's a tough haul, though, I got to tell you, because it could cost you a lot of fame and fortune." Carlton Pearson, as I pointed out, Pentecostal minister, said no one's going to hell, and everybody left his church.